Okay, again, for those who have just joined us, I may need to end the class early. I was sent home early today because of some eating poisoning. I don't know what. But we'll get through as much as we can today. Please forgive me if I end the class early. Um, but we'll get through as much as we can today, okay? So I'm gonna start the presentation. Okay, so the last topic we need to get through before we get into personality and abnormal psychology is the issue of romantic relationships, romantic love. And this is a topic that has been of much debate about why is it that we choose who we love. And so we're going to go through this from a scientific perspective. And then on next Tuesday, we'll start with we'll do a quick introduction into personality and then get into abnormal psychology next Thursday. And then we'll go from there. So, what is romantic love? Okay. The thing that makes romantic love such a tr sometimes traumatic, sometimes an amazing experience for us to have is that technically when we look at romantic love, when we choose that person that we want to be with, it's a biological by evolutionary combination. In biological and evolutionist theorists, they call this pair bonding. But it has a lot to do with our psychological and social upbringing. So when we're young children, and I think you'll remember this from the child development section, when we're infants, we know the difference between people who are good for us versus people who are bad for us. But then when we develop language, our parents determine based on language those who are good for us versus those are bad for us. So if we live within a gang society, we learn that gang people are those who love us. When we live in a loving situation where we're taught that people should respect us and love us and care for us, we go into a different society. But as infants, we know the difference between good people and bad people. But as we develop as human beings through language and culture, we tend to learn something different. The other thing that we need to note is the areas of the brain that is involved in romantic love. And I think I've said this over and over in this course that when we originally thought about romantic love, and if you look at the theories of romantic love, such as Sternberg's three aspects of love, and all of those different theories, while they do have some precedents, they are all based on emotion. And so when we get into the brain system, when we look at brain imaging, we would expect that the emotional areas of the brain would be the primary areas that would light up. They would be involved when we showed you pictures of people who you loved and you said you loved, and there was a strong, loving connection versus pictures of trees or mountains or unrelated things. And what we found is that when you think about people you're strongly in love with, it's not the higher areas of the brain that you think about. It's not the cortical areas. It's not the prefrontal areas of the brain. Indeed, it is the brain stem, which controls breathing, which controls hunger, which controls all of our basic biological functions that light up. And the other area of the brain that lights up is the parasympathetic area of the brain. That's the area between the limbic system, which is our basic biology, and the higher areas of the brain where we think about relationships and we reflect on those. That parasympathetic area of the brain is that very old connection of the limbic system to the cortical areas. So what we have learned is that our drive, and I think you can see this in any nature. You can see this with lions, you could see this with elephants, you can see this with monkeys as an example. You can see this with anything. There is this biological drive towards someone who we are viably to mate with and who would continue our offspring and survive with our offspring. And so there this so on the basic biological drive, we're driven to seek out romantic love. We're driven to seek out those who we think are the most biologically viable. And then there's something that we call the oxytocin and dopamine drive. Oxytocin, if you remember back to our developmental section, is a bonding chemical in our brain. Dopamine is our motivational perspective of the brain. So here's where I'm going to give some dating advice. If someone is interested in you, don't go and do a romantic stargazing relationship with them, because that's going to raise their serotonin levels. And the serotonin levels do with the emotional part of the brain. And when we lift serotonin levels, that reduces dopamine levels. Dopamine levels are the pleasure parts of the brain. They are what releases our motivational parts of the brain that gives us the reason to survive, the reason to live. Okay. So oxytocin is our bonding chemical. Dopamine is our motivational chemical. When we have oxytocin release, And then we have dopamine release. I hate to put this to you all on a biological level. You are attached to that person. You are going to be totally into that person. And that's why a lot of men and women, when they go into high risk situations where this is a bad boy or a bad girl, it's because it lifted those dopamine levels. And that's why you got addicted to that person, if you want to put it from a biological perspective. Because what needs to happen from a biological perspective is you have to have a dopamine lift and then an oxytocin lift
I guess
in order to fall in love with someone from a biological perspective. Okay. And so, what does this mean from a biological level? Is that one, this is dating advice, is one, you have to give your date a dopamine lift, meaning that instead of taking them to a romantic picnic, to a romantic movie, to something that lifts their serotonin levels, what you need to do is take them to a roller coaster. You need to take them something that lifts their levels of dopamine, the exciting chemicals in their body. And then if they have an oxytocin lift, they'll fall in love with you from a biological level. But then we have to look at the romantic love is biological by experience, or what we call the biopsychosocial model. So this is where I'm going to bring up limerence, which is this is what we call the phase of romantic love. And this is when that person that you're going to bond with becomes that person who is in front, and everything in the back doesn't matter. That person just comes in front of you and that's it. And you can see changes in perception. You initiate brooding and obsessive thinking about the individual. You worry about whether or not they're going to love you or hate you. There's a pendulum of swing where there's this ecstasy of love, and then there's this worry of withdrawal. Class, I have to apologize. I mentioned earlier that I'm having issues with um, eating and everything. So I'm gonna end right here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna